Well, we're down to the last week, and so I figured what the easiest and probably most logical thing for me to do with this last video is kind of just talk through the essay topics, and then if you have further questions, we can chat on Wednesday, I believe. I think set the audio video chat up for. So, a couple topics that people generally write about. Probably the most popular paper is writing about the Sweetheart of Sang Chubang story. And it's on page 89. And basically, what your thesis would be for that is it's a pretty simple one. You're just saying Sweetheart of Sang Chubang is a good example of a capital T true war story, right? Now, in the other lectures that I posted here, especially the first one on how to tell a true war story, I really go through what a capital T true war story is. So if you have more questions on that, that would be a good one to look at. And so what you'd be doing with this story is you would be looking for several things. And what I would do is, after we kind of talk about this, if you want to write about this story, I would read through it a couple times. It's short, right? It's only like 15, 16 pages. So you can go through it pretty quickly and, read it once and then read it again. And I think this is a good experience to have as you get used to as you get ready to go off to college, because in college you will generally write less papers, but they'll be worth a larger chunk of your grade, right? So if you're writing a final paper that's worth 40% of your grade, it would be worth it to you to read the text a second time, because it's going to make your essay a lot better. And so being able to practice that on a smaller chunk of text, 13, 14, 15 pages or whatever, I think is good practice for that. So these are the things you would be trying to put in here. So first of all, in proving why it's a capital T true war story, what we're supposed to feel in our gut by reading this story, right? So you read the story of this girl going over there and changing from, sweet and innocent into wearing the tongue necklace and sneaking off into the jungle barefoot with no weapon, right? What feeling? Like kind of fear, kind of maybe revulsion, kind of shock, kind of all these scary things about what can happen, right? And the reason that it is such a powerful stories because it is capital T true war story, right? It could not happen that a boyfriend could pull some strings and get his girlfriend shipped over through various military flights into the middle of the jungle in the middle of a war zone, right? That's impossible. But what we see what happens to her when she changes is what can happen to any soldier, right? Now, you need to go through the story and prove that, and you'll do it. There's a couple things that should be in here. First of all, you're looking at the transformation of Marianne, right? And so when she comes over, you're looking for, I would start by going through and taking down details. So I would just go through and take notes on the story, just as you've done, knock on wood, hopefully, from all these other papers. Start by taking notes. I would take notes on Marianne, right? Descriptions of her in the beginning, descriptions of how she changes, both her attitude and her physical appearance, right? In the beginning, there's quite a bit of time spent describing her wearing her cute pink sweater and cosmetics bag and looking pretty and being fun and innocent and all this stuff, right? So there's a lot of information there that's really put in there specifically to set up what's going to happen to her later, right? So I would take notes on Marianne and how she changes. I would take notes on their relationship, right? Because their relationship seems to be as innocent and sweet as she was when she arrived there, right? They've been married, they've been dating, boyfriend, girlfriend since elementary school or whatever, and they're going to grow up and live in a nice little cottage and all this stuff. And then very quickly, her attitude on marriage and things start to change, right? Like, of course, we'll still get married, but maybe we'll live together for all that type of thing, right? So, change of Marianne from the beginning to the end, right? And what that says. And then there's another part that I don't think I've really touched on, but we talked about a little bit with postmodernism last year, is called metafiction. You might have heard this term. And metafiction is when a writer is writing about the process of writing, or writing about how hard it is to write what they're writing. Okay, so if you remember back, you probably don't, but if you remember back to realism, when we read, it was Yellow Wallpaper and Paris Silk Stockings and Wagner Matinee, and the goal of realism is to call it as you see it, right? So you're trying to show what reality is by capturing it in writing. What O'Brien shows here, and in How to Tell a True War Story specifically, is that's impossible to do, so we shouldn't even try, right? Instead, we should be trying to create a picture of something, even if it's not real, that allows the reader to experience what you experienced, right? So, for instance, there are times when Rat Kiley, the writer of the letter, I'm in the wrong spot now. Hang on one second. It talks about, Rat Kiley, what he was doing in telling the story. It said, it wasn't a question of deceit, just the opposite. Rat Kiley, he wanted to heat the truth up to make it burn so hot that you would feel exactly what he felt. For Rat Kiley, I think facts were formed by sensation and not the other way around. And when you listen to one of his stories, you'd find yourself performing rapid calculations in his head. Your head, not his. That would be strange and weirdly powerful. Subtracting superlatives and figuring the square root of the absolute and then multiplying by maybe. Still, with this particular story, Rat never backed down. He claimed to have witnessed the incident with his own eyes, how upset he was when he became, how one morning when Mitchell Sanders challenged him on the basic premise. Now, the times when we go from Rat Kiley telling his story, right, and the details about all that stuff, to then we come back to both Tim O'Brien and Mitchell Sanders, it sounds like, and Rat Kiley in the process of hearing this story, and Rat Kiley in the process of telling it, because what he's doing seems to be what other soldiers have done and what Tim O'Brien is doing in his book. It really matters that the people understand it and believe what he's saying, right? And so when he talks about trying to pin down the specific details, things like that, metafiction, talking about the process of writing the story, those would be the other details you'd be looking for in here, right? So, quick recap on that: how Marianne changes, details of her in the beginning, details as she changes, details of her at the end, and what that says about any general soldier, and then the metafictional elements where we talk about the process of writing this story and the process of telling it and what Rat Kiley's trying to do. So that's a good one. Another one that I spent one of the lectures talking about, I think it was the third one, I went through The Man I Killed and Ambush and Good Form. That's another good paper. It spreads it out a little bit over 3 chapters, but I'd say those 3 chapters are probably even less pages than the Sweetheart story. And I really go through that one in pretty good detail. Another one you can write about is binary oppositions in the book. Binary oppositions are terms, and we've talked about this with Heart of Darkness, specifically civilized savage, 2 terms that appear to be opposites, but really their definitions are dependent upon the opposing term, and so really those definitions are much closer than they appear, right? So the European people thought they were civilized, they thought the people from Africa were savage, but what we see as we look in the book is the European people acting savage and the people of Africa acting in a civilized way, you know what I'm saying? So one of those is bravery and fear, or bravery and shame, bravery and cowardice. You can kind of pick the negative term you want to, because it seems like they're opposites, right? So if you want to write about this, the Up on the Rainy River story really hits this one well. That's the story where he gets his draft notice, and so you could talk about kind of the process of him making his decision, and even just kind of bring in some of where the scene where he decides he's on the boat, and I think he's on the boat with Elroy, and it said, I was a coward, I would go to war, right? And it seems as if going to war is one of the bravest things one can do, but the reason he's doing it is because he's embarrassed and afraid and doesn't want to look like a wimp, right? And so it's actually that shame and embarrassment and fear which is driving the seemingly brave behavior, right? We can see that again with Dentist, the guy who gets the perfectly good tooth ripped out just because he wants to show everyone how tough he is, showing that these ideas of bravery and cowardice are much more closely aligned. You could also do that also with friends and enemies, which would be another one. Friends and enemies seem to be different, complete opposites, and your friends and enemies are total opposites. But what happens in those stories, that's the story of the guys who, they got into a fight over a jackknife, right? So they went from being friends on the same side of the war to enemies over something as silly as a jackknife to friends again after the fight, right? And after one of the guys breaks his own nose, that example, bravery again. And then they come up with this pact, right? That if either of them gets paralyzed or severely wounded, that's going to greatly affect the quality of their life, then their friend is supposed to kill them. Now, this kind of takes this deeper because friends generally don't kill each other, right? And when the other friend refuses to kill his friend who he promised to kill, is that being a friend? Or is that being what the enemy does, letting this guy keep going on living, right? So just looking at how these ideas, and you could probably just do it, that would be enough stories. Up on the Rainy River and The Dentist for bravery and cowardice, and then friends and enemies for being friends and being enemies with each other. You could also write, if you wanted to, the Up on the Rainy River story, doing the same idea as we did for the Sweetheart story, right? So you would be going through just that story and explaining why it's a capital T true war story. In that one has a lot of the capital T true war parts of that one are when he's imagining things, right? So before he goes, before he goes, he talks about, sorry, my dog is trying to jump up in my lap. Before he goes, he talks about imagining all the people and in the cafe and in his hometown, thinking about and judging him. We also get another really good scene of that where he's on the boat with Elroy, and he's talking about Elroy brought him over to the edge of the river so that if he wanted to, I mean, basically what Elroy made him do, this is my dog Josie, what Elroy made him do is confronted him with this decision, right? And so by taking him out on the boat all the way across to the far shore of Canada, if Tim jumps out of the boat and does a quick swim 20 yards or so, then he's not going to war and he's free, right? So he kind of forced him to confront that decision. And as he's in the process of confronting that decision, he thinks of all the people he'd be letting down, right? And these are people in his hometown, but they're also kind of fictional characters from American history, right? And presidents and Uncle Sam and all these imaginary things that he imagines in his mind. What he's trying to make you feel is the decision that you would have to make if you were to be drafted and had to go do something like this, right? All the different factors you're going to consider. And there's no way that he could ever really, if he told it exactly the way it happened, make you feel that dread and fear in your gut, right? But by adding these things that didn't happen, it allows you to understand what he was feeling. So I'd say those are generally the papers that people choose to write about. And I think there's plenty for each of those to write about. And again, last thing I'll say on this, since you're writing about a smaller amount of text, please go through the stories a couple times. I think it'll make writing the paper a lot easier. One last thing I will say, and I want to say this to everybody, thank you. I've enjoyed working with you. I'm sorry that this is such a weird trimester and things worked out the way they did. So I hope it went okay for you this term. Josie's tired of it too. I wish you the very best next year, and I hope you stay in touch with me. I'd be happy to help with any papers you need help with over your college career and help you in whatever way I can. My last bit of advice for college, I have two. One, do everything you can, right? And I know that orientation and stuff this year might be weird or whatever, but try to go to as much of that stuff as you can. College should be fun, right? Work hard, have fun, right? Because you will be an adult soon, and then you have the rest of your life to do adult things. And so make sure you're having fun while you're in college. And lastly, for every single paper you write, in college, do this for me. You're paying a lot of money to go to that school, take it to the Writing Center. Figure out where the Writing Center is. It's staffed by upper class people who are going to be teachers or people who are going to be writers or book editors or things, and this is their job and they get paid. And at the very least, to have them proofread your paper, right? And then you go back and make revisions on it so that you've had at least one round of people looking at it before you turn it in. You could also ask them to look at your paper for specific things, for your argument or for your thesis or for your evidence, or do you elaborate on your evidence enough, whatever it is. Make sure you get that done because that will make your writing a lot better and you'll learn to be a better writer too. So thank you so much. I've had a good term with you, even though I haven't gotten to see a lot of us, and I hope you're doing well. Take care.